Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are talking about how to seek and discern guidance. We wanted to talk about this because the daily practice of asking for guidance has a very central place in A Course in Miracles. As we've been saying a lot recently, the Course wants us to make asking such a habit that we're no longer thinking, should I ask? But instead, we're just finding ourselves routinely asking. In other words, the Course is leading us to a place where asking for guidance is as much a part of our everyday as brushing our teeth or getting dressed. Robert and I have been talking a lot about guidance for many years. And one of the things that we've both observed is that this is one of those topics where people tend to say they want it more than they actually do. Guidance is a process that requires willingness to turn over our decision making, which tends to bring up a lot of resistance. And at the same time, with quality guidance, we have the opportunity to tap into wisdom that is so far beyond what we're capable of with our own tiny little brains. And so whether you're eager to ask for guidance or whether you're just not sure yet, if the Course is your path, this is a practice that's worth exploring. So today is part one of a two-part series that Robert and I will be leading on the place of guidance in the Course. Today we're going to be covering how guidance appears in the Course, why you should ask, and what you should ask about. And next week we'll be covering how to ask, how to listen, and how to discern the voice of real guidance from the voice of our egos. So, Robert, let's begin by talking about how the subject of guidance appears in the Course. So this is something that weaves through all three volumes, which we'll get into, but it's also interesting to note that on the very night before the Course starts coming through, Helen receives guidance about guidance. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, Helen had been hearing what she called the voice in snippets. And she was writing down some of those little snippets in the few days before the Course started coming through. And then what happened is, because she was hearing, Bill wanted to know how he could hear. And she had offered to ask on his behalf. And so he apparently wanted her to ask how he could hear guidance better. And that prompted the first real discourse. It was, relatively long, that had a number of points given to Bill about how he could receive guidance more like Helen was. And that discourse led directly into the Course itself coming through. It was like that was the priming of the pump, you could say.
Yeah, and I don't want to tease anyone. So can you share what Jesus told Helen about how to hear? I know if we had the opportunity to ask Jesus, how do we hear guidance better? We'd all want to know what he has to say. So can you share what he told Helen?
Yeah, what's interesting is he said some things that show up much later in the workbook as emphases around guidance. So, for instance, he said Bill needs to be more patient. He hangs up too quickly, and Jesus says he has to make his messages really cryptic and short so that Bill doesn't hang up before he's done. And he said that Bill needs to have more confidence that Jesus will get through. He says he never just claims his rights, as if we should be confident about receiving guidance, treating it as a right that we can claim. He said that Bill needed more concentration, better concentration. And for that sake, he suggested a wonderful meditation technique that Bill could use to focus and still his mind so that he could hear better. He also said that he shouldn't put Helen on a pedestal. That's not the language that was used, but in this regard, that it will endanger both of them if he kind of sees her as like the guidance source and he's not in that picture at all. There were a couple other things that were said, but those are the things that stand out most to me. And like I say, most of what I just said is echoed in the workbook.
Yeah. And I also feel like we could end the podcast right there, to be honest with you. That is just such good advice on guidance. I mean, how many of us can relate to wanting to claim guidance, wanting to feel like we're entitled to it, but not really believing that? And also the idea of hanging up too quickly, like that Jesus can't quite get through. And we all, I think, can relate to that idea as well.
And the confidence, that's
And
a
the
huge thing.
concentration as well.
Concentration. Yeah. I mean, it's a really golden, information for Bill. And I think it's so great that those things get pulled out and made a focus in the workbook.
Yeah, so we'll get to that in a minute, but before we get to the workbook, let's start with the text. So guidance appears most often in the text. The text contains the most teaching on guidance. And so what does the text have to say about guidance? And also for any student who's really curious about guidance, where should they go in the text to look for it?
Well, it's kind of all over. It's all throughout. If you have the CE, I would suggest going to the cameos, because you're going to find a lot of emphasis. Cameos are built around personal guidance to Helen and Bill, and in the early parts of the dictation of the text, they were being told again and again of the importance of asking Jesus what they should do and what they should say. So there's a lot like the chain of miscreation guidance that we've mentioned a lot lately, Cameo 14. You'll see a lot of it in there. But with the text, it's just found all over the place. There's a lot in chapter 14. There's a great, I think the premier place is in Rules for Decision, which is in chapter 30 in the text. And that's a whole lengthy section about how to have this ideal happy day, the day you want. And the whole means for having this happy day is you constantly seek for guidance for all of your decisions throughout the day. There's a detailed practice given you for that.
Yeah, and you can also go old school by downloading the app at acimce.app and just doing a search for guidance and just discover for yourself how often it appears.
And especially the word decisions. Because every time he's talking about decisions in the course, he talks about asking the Holy Spirit for them.
All right. So what does the text say about it?
Oh, it's hard to condense it. There's just so much said. But the basic idea is just the sheer importance of turning to the Holy Spirit for our decisions. How much our decisions affect us and affect, he says, the whole sonship. And therefore, they shouldn't be in our hands. We can't handle that responsibility well. So he just keeps saying in different ways all throughout the text that we should turn to the Holy Spirit for our decisions. There's a really great discussion of this towards the end of chapter 11, where he basically says, you've complained that this course isn't specific enough for you to use. And he says, but I've been telling you to ask and you will receive. That's about as specific as you can get. He said, the problem is you don't want to ask because you're afraid of what the Holy Spirit will say. And that's a theme all throughout the course as well.
Do we want to talk about that now? Do we want to talk about that resistance that we have to asking for guidance? Because as I was saying in the intro, it does require us to turn over control. And that's why we don't ask. We say we forget to ask, but really we just don't want to because we're afraid of what we're going to hear. And so what would you say to someone who is just like, no, I absolutely don't want to turn over that kind of control of my decision making?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to understand that it is a control issue, like you said. It took me years and like decades to understand that. I had a focus on asking going back to, I think, the early 80s. And I just found myself kind of ambivalent, doing more of it, doing less of it, always feeling like I'm not really doing enough. Why am I not doing enough? And never realizing it was a control issue until I read it in the text. Especially there's a section that's new to the CE in chapter 4 called Asking and Following. And that's based on a whole discourse that was given mainly to Bill about his asking and also Helen's. And the idea is that Bill shied away from asking because he was afraid of giving up control. He thought he knew the one right option. And so even if Helen asked and got something different, he would decide, well, you didn't hear right because I know the right option. And it was really through that discourse that I realized the obvious and then started seeing it all over the course. Like I've been missing it for years and years. It's a control issue. We're all control freaks. And then I realized, oh, that's my issue. As I think is common with guidance, I've had hundreds, if not more, instances of asking and being told something I don't really want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you think, well, when I ask, I might get God knows what. One of my favorite examples is I got out of the blue, like clean the garage. Well, that is like my least favorite thing to do in life. And I ended up really happy about it after I had done it. But then you think like the lesson I should have learned was asking is a great thing. But I think part of the lesson I learned was you never know what you're going to be hit with.
Yeah, you have all kinds of little stories about asking for guidance and being told to do something that you didn't want to do, but then you do it and then you realize, oh, I'm glad that I did that, or it worked out better for you or someone else in the long run. And so it's a way to learn to lean on the guidance and trust it, because if you have enough of those stories where it's like, I didn't want to do it, but I did it and it worked out. I mean, the more that happens, the more you start to trust the guidance that you receive. I think for me, it's not only that the resistance comes from a place where I'm afraid I'm going to be told to do something that I don't have the energy or the desire to do, like, clean the garage. But I know I know I've been through this enough. I know that the guidance is going to tell me to hold a perspective that maybe I don't want to hold. And so the guidance is always going to tell you to look out for the interests of the other person. We'll get to this more when we talk about how to discern real guidance. But just as a preview, one of the hallmarks of true guidance is that it's always taking other people's interests into account. And we don't want to do that all the time, like when we're holding a grievance, for example, that real guidance is going to say, look out for the best interest of all. And so I find that my resistance to asking for guidance is also about that. It's like, I know it's going to ask me to be good, and sometimes I just don't want to be good.
Yeah. And I think there's a related thing with me, and that is there's something kind of sick inside me. And I think I'm not the only one that says,
oh, we're getting real, aren't we?
That says it's better in principle to be in control, even if you end up less happy.
Yes.
And that's really sick, isn't it?
That's the power of the ego. And that's the thing. I'm so glad that you said that, because that's the very thing that we need to confront head on. It's like, would you rather be in control than have the benefit of higher wisdom and the effect of that higher wisdom in your life?
And there you're happier and others are happier.
Totally. And there's something in us that is just that petulant little child that wants to fold our arms and say, no, I want it this way. And I want to be the decision maker. And so we should really just, again, face that within ourselves. So let's go on to the workbook. How does guidance appear in the workbook?
Yeah, this is a really important topic, because kind of like the points that were given to Bill, people are wondering, well, how can I hear? And the workbook has training in how to ask and how to hear and when. And so we should be paying really close attention. I'm pretty sure, yeah, the topic first comes in lesson 49, God's voice speaks to me all through the day. And what we do in that lesson is I think our fifth meditation lesson in the 40s. And we meditate to sink beneath our frantic, crazy, conscious mind to this deep part in our mind where we are always hearing God speak to us. So we're meditating to connect with God's voice speaking to us all through the day. And that kicks off a whole kind of intermittent series that goes on for about 40 more lessons with a big focus on asking, receiving different things from the Holy Spirit, like experiences of vision, but especially receiving answers, messages. And Review 2 has a big focus on that. And then later in the workbook, we have about 40 lessons or so in which, beginning with lesson 153, where we are told to ask what to do in the hour to come, every hour, every day for 40 days. So that's literally hundreds and hundreds of instances of asking if we carry that out.
Yeah, I just want to repeat that. So we're asked to ask every hour on the hour for a period of 40 days. That's remarkable. And so for those who are like, well, I can't hear anything, you can't go through those 40 days and think that you don't hear, because something's going to come through. And guidance, I've always felt like guidance is like a physical muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets. And so just that practice, if you're looking for a place to start with guidance, just saying, okay, I'm going to set my alarms and I'm going to ask on the hour what to do in the hour ahead. And I guarantee you something's going to come.
Yeah, I do think, and you and I have talked about this, that a lot of times you hear people say, I never hear anything. But if you listen to those same people long enough, they'll share stories of where they heard something. I think we say we don't hear anything we say that when it's not really true. Something in us is just in a bit of a snit about it. And my experience, I mean, I'm not, a very clear channel. I feel I don't hear words really. I get shots of intuition. I don't get these long sort of connected messages or discourses like a lot of people do. Probably about a third of the time, I don't hear anything. And yet, even somebody as hearing challenged as me, I get lots and lots of really helpful guidance, which makes it worth asking.
Yeah. And you just said a third of the time I don't hear anything. And I'd say that's accurate. But what that means is that 2/3 of the time you do. And so is it worth not asking at all because you don't hear all the time?
Yeah, it's so worth asking. I think it's not about that. It's about, control. That's the resistance.
So in the workbook, as you're saying, so often we're being taught how to ask through the act of meditation. And it goes back to that guidance that Helen received that we just spoke of before the course came through. When she said to Jesus, how can Bill hear better? And he was like, quiet the mind, claim your rights. This is the kind of instruction that appears throughout the workbook, right?
Yeah. For instance, he told Bill that he hung up too soon. In that stretch in the workbook between 49 and 90, he talks about being patient and renewing your question and waiting longer. He talks about listening with an attitude of confidence that you will hear. He gives us meditations that are designed to be, an act of us reaching this deeper place in our minds so that we can hear. He talks about stilling our minds, being the key to hearing, the ability to quiet our thoughts. All of that is precisely mirrored in what he told Bill.
Oftentimes, when we think about asking for guidance, we think that we're asking something outside of us. We're asking God, who appears to be out, just like asking dad for what to do. But throughout the workbook, we're taught to go inward and ask for guidance. So part of claiming our right to guidance is understanding that we're asking something that's already within us.
Yeah, it is an independent voice. That's, I think, what scares us. Is not controlled by our conscious opinions. But yeah, it's within us. And the key, at least as that's the workbook says again and again, is going within and learning how to get very, very still.
Right. And that's an important distinction to make. Like, I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that we're just asking our higher self. We're asking God, we're asking Jesus, we're asking the Holy Spirit. And I know we're going to get to like this whole thing of who we're asking in just a minute, but it is that independent presence, but that independent presence of God, that voice of God, that voice for God is in us. And that's part of, I think, claiming it is just recognizing that it's already there.
Well, and that's so much of the point of that lesson 49 that I mentioned, because the idea is if you can tune into that deeper place in your mind, you will discover that God is speaking to you all through the day. He's talking to you all the time. So it's not like you're going to ask and you should think, well, will he answer me this time? He's talking to you all the time. You just have to tune into that place in you where he's speaking and you're always hearing.
Yeah, I've heard some teachers refer to it as like the dialing in on the radios. We used to have the radios where you would tune in and then you would get the channel coming through clearly. It's our own thoughts and the own craziness within our own mind that causes the static. And it's the meditation that causes us to tune in so that we can hear God's voice more clearly in our mind. And I've always found that to be instructive and an instructive way to think about it.
Yeah. 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 The
Okay.
whole tuning in thing. I guess we don't do that with radios anymore.
I know.
Somewhere along the line that dropped out.
You don't hear it very often anymore because nobody uses radios, but I remember thinking, gosh,
Yeah.
that's really valuable. I mean, it's the station's broadcasting all the time. God is talking
Yeah.
to us all the time, all throughout the day, as the lesson said, and we're just not hearing it because we're not tuning in. And that's the power of meditation. It gives us that ability to tune in so his voice comes through more clearly. So we went through the text and the workbook. Let's talk about how guidance appears in the third volume of the course, which is the Manual for Teachers.
Yeah. Now the third volume I think is extremely misunderstood. I mean, I think the other two are as well. But I think the Manual for Teachers is seen as like a Q&A. It's like an FAQ. But it's really for students of the course who are more advanced because they've really done the text and really done the workbook. And it's giving them instruction for their continued journey as they develop more fully, as they take on pupils, as they go and visit healing patients. And because it's about them making decisions about their lives and about their functions, there's a huge guidance emphasis in the manual. And I don't know if I want to read through, I did a little summary of the theme in the manual, and it's kind of long. I don't know if I want to read through it, but page for page, the manual has the heaviest focus on guidance of all three volumes. The text has the most because it's by far the longest volume. But page for page, the manual has the most. And one of the things it acts like is that as we advance, we don't ask less, we ask more. And this is a kind of a meme that's gotten out there, or the opposite of that has gotten out there in course circles where like, yeah, early on, you should be doing some asking, but leave that behind. That's like the lowest rung of the ladder. As you get more advanced, you shouldn't be asking, that's kind of child's play. And the manual acts the exact opposite. It says that the teacher of God will ask with increasing frequency. And he'll turn to the Holy Spirit increasingly as he lets go of his own judgments. Him thinking he knows what to do.
Yeah, I think that whole trope about the course isn't about asking for guidance, or that asking for guidance is just the elementary step until you get to the real thing. All of that is just part of our resistance. You can't look at how often guidance and guided decision making and the presence of the Holy Spirit and asking God, asking the Holy Spirit, it's just, again, it's weaved throughout all three volumes. And if you just glance at how often guidance appears in the course, you can't say that it's not a part of our practice as students, or meant to be at the very least. So moving from the manual to the Song of Prayer supplement of the course, the Song of Prayer has an interesting origin story, and asking for guidance is involved in how the Song of Prayer actually came about. So can you share that story?
It's so interesting. We could talk a lot about that. So the early course family, Helen and Bill and Ken Wapnick and Judy Skutch Whitson, she wasn't Whitson then, they would sit down and ask, especially about things having to do with the course's life in the world. And they'd ask very specifically, which Helen and Bill had been taught to do throughout the entire dictation of the course. And Ken Wapnick grew uncomfortable with that. He felt like it was turning Jesus into this trivial kind of information giver. And he and Helen had many conversations about it. And finally, Jesus decided to dictate the supplement, especially in the beginning parts of which this issue was addressed. And there was a whole 6-paragraph preamble to the Song of Prayer that does not appear in the Song of Prayer supplement, which also addressed even very specifically this issue amongst the four of them. And what was said is very interesting, because I think Ken Wapnick took it to back him up and say, hey, we've got to really outgrow this asking for guidance thing. And then he taught that for years. Interestingly, the Foundation for Inner Peace kept right on with that practice to this day. So they didn't miss it. So the two different sides went opposite ways with that guidance. What it actually says, though, is,
which is kind of funny because that happened decades ago.
I know.
So, Ken and his tribe went one way, the Foundation went the other way. And it's still like that to this day with Ken's students and with the Foundation. It's kind of funny.
It is kind of funny because we just interviewed Tam for this podcast, Tam Morgan, who's Judy's daughter and the current president. And she's like a constantly open guidance faucet, right? And she's talking about it all the time. And so, and that's how it was when Judy was around too. They were asking all the time. So it's just funny that they went such different ways after having received guidance from Jesus that directly addressed what they should do.
But we should be clear about that, because Ken wanted to ask whether you should ask for guidance, they should ask for guidance for routine matters of the world. And he felt like guidance, that God didn't really operate in the world, and therefore asking for guidance of what to do in the world was a moot point. And what came through was that Ken was right and not right. So can you talk about the distinction between how he was right and how he was not right?
Well, let's just talk first about what was said. What was said was outlining what I think is a very high level, where you no longer ask specifically. You realize the only thing you really want is the song of God's love, the experience of God's love. Okay. And so you ask for that. That's where you point your desires. That's what you go for when you quiet your mind in prayer and meditation. But when you've reached that place where you realize that's all you want, you receive the song, and along with the song come what's called the echoes. And the echoes are the specific messages you need to guide you in your worldly decisions. So you don't think that's what it's all about. You're going for the song, but Jesus says there are decisions to make here, and they must be made whether they be illusions or not. And so as you hear the song, those echoes come off of it. And so you're told what to do and what to say and so on.
But that's the highest state.
That's the highest state.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. And it acknowledges, it's not like we don't need guidance. It's like, yeah, you're still going to get it. But wouldn't it be great to get it without having to constantly ask? We just ask for God's love, and we're told, say this, do this, go here, turn right, turn left. Wouldn't that be amazing to have that kind of relationship with God? So Ken, to be honest, I think he heard something along the lines of what he wanted to hear. In fact,
who doesn't?
Yeah, who doesn't? In fact, the FIP gang were told in that preamble to the Song of Prayer that their practice was right and they should continue it. But there were these kind of further kind of horizons in the guidance journey. So they were told, good on you, keep doing it. You're doing what I told you to do. Why would he say, ask all throughout all 3 volumes? They do that. And he's like, shame on you. Of course, he said you're doing the right thing, but he said that there are places to go on the mountain that are still higher in relation to guidance.
Yeah. I love both pieces of that because it offers us something to aspire to. You know, we can get to that place spiritually where we're asking for the song of God's love, and the echoes of that is the guidance that we need. And we don't have to say on top of every hour and every moment that there's a decision to be made. What should I do? We just know, because our mind is in that higher place. You know, we're asking for the song of God's love, and the echoes in the form of guidance come. Amazing. But again, we're not there yet. And oftentimes, like when we do guidance workshops or whatnot, we'll say to students, you know, where do you think that you are on the ladder of prayer? And it's amazing how often we think we're higher than we actually are. And so yes, we can hold that out as a aspiration while also appreciating the second part of what he's saying, which is keep asking, keep strengthening that muscle. And so Jesus acknowledges that both sides are true.
I've done a diagram that's kind of based on a series of different quotes found in different places, and I really like it. And the idea is, we start out with what you might call involuntary forgetting to ask. It just seems like we forget, but it's not, it's involuntary. We have no power over how much we forget to ask. Then we move into voluntary remembering to ask, or remember occasionally because it's voluntary. Then we start building the habit of asking. And then we reach a place where Jesus said to Helen and Bill, where the habit of asking becomes involuntary. The habit is so strong that we ask as an involuntary reflex. Okay. And then once the habit of asking becomes involuntary, the hearing becomes involuntary. We don't have to ask. We just involuntarily hear whenever we need to hear. Now, I think what we'd love to do is just stop asking and say, I'm at the end. But the fact is that superficially, the very first stage, involuntary forgetting to ask, and the very last stage, involuntary hearing, no asking, they look superficially the same. In both, you aren't asking. So you can be in that first stage and say, I'm in the last stage. Look.
Right. Meanwhile, what you're involuntarily hearing is your own ego.
Right.
And
your ego's
you're
just
calling it guidance and acting on it and wondering why it's not working.
Yeah. And I think we do a lot of, I've heard course teachers, and this is not just people in Ken Wapnick's stable. I've heard teachers basically find different ways to say, just get in the right groove mentally and trust whatever you do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically the first stage, right? You need to go through a whole process where you voluntarily ask, you form the habit of asking, the habit becomes so strong, you involuntarily ask. And then when you're really established there, you begin to let it go and you involuntarily hear. all
Right.
the
And
time.
there's a whole process to this with a series of steps that you have to learn all along the way. And as you're saying, oftentimes we are taught, or we just think that if we're in the right frame of mind, the guidance will come. And that's true, but we're so often not as advanced as we think we are in terms of being in that right frame of mind. And then there's also all of these there's a lot of misinformation out there. So there's the idea that the ego speaks first and loudest, and so therefore the first thing that you hear you have to dismiss because it's automatically of the ego. Not true. And we even heard in a workshop that you did the other day someone say, well, I know that the first thing I hear is not the ego but the Holy Spirit, and so therefore I have to trust the first thing that I hear. And so you've got this whole confusion. Some students are like, I can't trust the first thing I hear, it's of the ego. And then you've got other students who are like, I have to trust the first thing I hear. And meanwhile, this whole process that the course is teaching us and leading us through is out of the conversation. It's not in the picture. So there's just a lot
Yeah.
of misinformation and confusion out there about this.
We're talking about, I mean, our decisions determine our lives. From the course's standpoint, asking for guidance is how we make decisions. So we're going to be going on a long journey with that whole thing as we mature spiritually and as we learn how to live, under the Holy Spirit. And so, yeah, this is not like something you snap your fingers and you're like, hey, I'm in tune, so I do whatever I feel like doing. That's stage one.
Right. Well, that gets me to the next question, which is, why do we ask? And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I feel like the bottom line answer here is we ask because we aren't so good at making decisions for ourselves. So what else would you say from a course perspective of why it is that we're supposed to ask? And maybe if you're listening, like, keeping in mind this why could be motivation for you if you're resistant to asking.
Yeah, well, there's a
I said
great,
resistant, which is a combination of reluctant and resistant, but I just made up my own word there.
it's a new word in the
It's a
English
thing,
language. Yeah.
trendsetter.
So there's a great place in the manual, section 10, but its themes are echoed in other places in the course. And the basic idea, wherever you look when the course deals with this, you hear the same things. First of all, we don't know all the facts. To know all the relevant facts, he says, you would have to be aware of an inconceivably wide range of things, past, present, and to come. Like, that's crazy. No one has that. But the other thing has to do with our impact on others. Okay. So he says you'd have to know all the effects of your decisions on everyone involved. And then elsewhere in the course, he says everyone is involved. Each decision you have affects the entire sonship in ways that you don't know, you can't predict. Okay. And then the other thing he says in section 10, the manual, is you have to be sure that your perception is not biased. And what he means by not biased, he explains as it's wholly fair to everyone. So in your decisions, you'd have to not think, well, I'm going to really look out for these people in this decision, and I'm going to ignore these people, and I'm going to slight these people, right? That's bias. You need to treat everyone equally and fairly. And so what he basically says is that if we decide by ourselves, we're deciding on a vastly inadequate data set, and we're going to be irresponsible in terms of our effects on other people. We do affect everyone with every decision, and we're not going to affect them in a truly positive, constructive way. And therefore, deciding by ourselves, the text says, means we stack up guilt. We're not aware of it, but somewhere in our mind, we're saying, you know what, you're mainly looking out for you and yours. And other people are casualties along the way, and therefore guilt accumulates.
That's so interesting, because as you're going through and you're saying, well, we don't really take into account everyone else, I'm wondering how much we take into account anyone else. It just feels
Right.
like so much
Right.
of the quote unquote guided decision making that we get, it's about what we wanted originally, which is a hallmark of how it's not real guidance, or it's just there's almost like a self-righteous tone to it sometimes. Like people will say, well, I was guided to do this thing, and no one else is served by that but them. And
Yeah.
so when we get into like why we should be asking, one of the huge motivators is everyone is served. And when everyone is served, it works out better in the end. You don't have all of this like nasty chaos and interpersonal messes to clean up, because the guidance led you in the highest and best for all.
Yeah. It doesn't mean everyone will be happy with it, but it does mean lots of people will see the rightness in it, and those who don't will eventually be served.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's a really important point to bring up. You and I have had situations with guidance where we felt genuinely guided to make certain decisions. Not everybody was happy with the decisions that were made, but in the end, it worked out for even those who weren't happy. And so we have to kind of hold fast to what we consider to be our true guidance, even if someone else isn't happy with it. But at the same time, as you're doing whatever it is that they're not happy about, you're still devoted to them. You're still in a consciousness of love. So I think it's important to say that just because you feel like a decision is guided doesn't mean that everybody's going to fall in line.
And just because you say your decision was guided doesn't mean anything.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's just a way of saying, shut up. Don't challenge my decision. Don't question it. There's a great line in the manual that says the teacher of God is willing to reconsider all past decisions if they are causing pain to anyone. So we need to have a real open mind. Just because something felt in the flow doesn't mean it was guided. And I think we should I think we should do a lot less of this thing I did was guided and that thing I did was guided. Like, just get the guidance and act. You don't have to telegraph to everybody that it was so guided.
Yeah, those feel like very related and also different points to me. Like you can have legitimate guidance that others don't agree with, and then you just kind of have to hold to what you believe to be true. And I feel like it's a whole other conversation about how much we say in the spiritual community that we're guided to do this and guided to do that. And I have less of an issue with people saying, oh, I was guided to do this, than I do when I feel it's a tool to shut me up or anyone up, right? Like it's like when someone says, I feel guided to do this thing, then you're supposed to back off. And that's not right or fair. And so to the extent that we're doing that, let's look in the mirror on that one too.
Yeah, I think there are times, of course, to say I felt guided because you had a genuine experience that's relevant information for the other people involved. Mm-hmm. And then there are times just to just keep quiet about it.
But there are also times where someone says, I feel guided, and again, you're supposed to back off. But there's also times where someone says, I'm guided, and you just know that your job as the listener is to be impressed and to hold them in a place that is advanced spiritually. And that's the use of guidance. Like they're saying, I was guided to do this thing so that you view them in this exalted way. And that's not fair either. Like I see that a lot too. We see that a lot too. And so there's just ways to misuse all of this.
Yeah, I would say, well, we've already said it kind of repeatedly, so we probably should move on.
Just when you get your guidance, like ask for guidance, get your guidance, but just don't telegraph it. Like it's just hold it within yourself and do what it tells you to do if you feel like that's true for you. But just the saying, I was guided to do this and guided to do that, guided to tell you this. That's not what we're talking about here. So, okay, we're kind of running out of time, so we should probably get through some of these last questions really quickly. But this is a big one from students when we talk about guidance, and it's that, who are we supposed to be asking? There's God, there's Jesus, there's the Holy Spirit, there's angels. So who are we talking to?
Well, from the course's standpoint, there's lots of big focus on asking God directly. There's a big focus on asking the Holy Spirit. There's a big focus on asking Jesus. There's even some focus on asking Christ, our true self. We're never really told to ask angels. So, why not? But I don't personally ask angels for guidance. I guess you could.
You ask angels for things.
For help. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like, why not? I think a lot of this is what feels right to you personally and what you connect with. I tend to ask Jesus for guidance about specifics. I don't really ask God for guidance much. I talk to God about my relationship with God and so on, but I don't do a lot of asking. But that's just me. The course has us ask God explicitly. The course has us ask all three of those characters, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit.
But when you ask one, you're actually getting all three. So do you want to talk about that?
Well, if you look at the course's references to its own ideas, its story is that its teachings came ultimately from God through the Holy Spirit to Jesus and to us, obviously through Helen Schucman. So which of the characters did they come from? All of them, right? The course's teaching came from God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus. And I think that same chain, the course acts like that's going on all the time with everything, far beyond the course's teachings.
That one idea has helped me tremendously over the last 5 or 6 years. It used to be that when I would say to you, questions from students, who do we ask? You would say something similar to what you just said. Well, you can ask God, you can ask Jesus, you can ask the Holy Spirit. It's whoever you feel comfortable with, whoever you feel like you have the deepest relationship with. And then we did some kind of series where we were talking about how God, how the course came, as you just said, from God through the Holy Spirit, through Jesus, through Helen to us. And if you keep that chain in place, then I find guidance becomes far less confusing, because before I was thinking, well, I have the closest relationship with Jesus, but Jesus isn't the most powerful here. God is. So I want to kind of go over Jesus to the boss, but at the same time, I just felt closer to Jesus. And I was always a little confused about guidance for that reason. And once I got that chain clear in my head, guidance kind of fell into place. It was like, when I asked Jesus, I am asking the Holy Spirit and God, because the answer is coming through God, through the Holy Spirit, through Jesus to me. And so I hope that that's helpful to anyone else who's confused on that issue as well. Okay, so let's talk about what the course says we should ask about. There's a whole long list here, but it's full of big things and small things, which students might find surprising.
Yeah. Well, the course itself, for me, the even more interesting list is what Helen and Bill asked about, or were told they should have asked about. But just the course itself, we have a very rich list. We should ask which miracles to perform, miracles being here expressions of love to other people that help them, and which ones not to perform. We're supposed to ask about all decisions. Today, I will make no decisions by myself from Rules for Decision. We're supposed to ask, as we said earlier, what to do in the coming hour. We're supposed to ask about our plans for the day. Supposed to ask what to do, where to go, what to say, and to whom on a given day. We should ask if we should make changes in our life situation. We should ask how to help a pupil if we're a teacher who is resisting our teaching. We should ask what words to say to someone who has come to us for help or healing. We should ask whether a pupil of ours or a prospective pupil should begin with the text, with the workbook, or with the manual, or is even ready for A Course in Miracles at all. And that's not an exhaustive list. I mean, basically, it's everything, right?
Yeah. And on that point, it's everything. I mean, you said here we're to ask about all decisions, and there's that line in the Course that says, "Today I will make no decisions by myself." Well, no decisions. That's big, because no decisions mean like, do I take a shower now? Do I go to bed now? And that's the kind of asking that I think would drive us batty. So what are we supposed to be at? Like, what is too small? And I think we get that we're supposed to ask for the big things, but you and I have heard horror stories of people standing at the grocery store saying, should I buy this apple or should I buy this apple? I mean, that would just, God, I can't even. So how are we supposed to deal with the little things when it comes to guidance?
Yeah, well, a couple of things about that. One from the Course and one just from personal experience. I think that, well, first of all, the Course acknowledges that asking, like, I can't speak before I ask for guidance. That's impractical. It says, no, indeed. Should you, do you have to ask before you say anything to anyone? No, indeed. That wouldn't be practical. And it is the practical with which this Course is most concerned. So he just says, ask whenever you can, whenever it's feasible, all throughout the day. And if you do, he says, wisdom will be given you when you need it. So if you don't hear anything when you ask, you might hear something later when you need it. The other thing I would say is that I find that it's useful to distinguish between asking on the fly while you're in the middle of a situation or a conversation. And I find that often works. I can often just shoot a little question, and sometimes I'll get nothing. And sometimes a really helpful idea will pop right into my head that's just the right thing to say or do. So I find that's useful to do. You can do that really easily and quickly. And then I think there are the more formal sit down, close your eyes, take 2 minutes or 3 minutes and ask. And I think those are important as well. And I tend to have more success in those. But I think it's good to have both in your arsenal. Just don't get too hung up over it. He says in Rules for Decision that what you want to do is establish a mindset. And with that mindset, that will see you through a lot of decisions without you even realizing it. The key thing is to watch out for when you refuse to ask, when you are, as that section says, unwilling to sit by and ask.
Yeah, I love that quote about it's the practical with which this Course is concerned. And so, as you're saying, he's not asking us to ask about absolutely everything, but when we have a decision to make that is important, even if it's a smaller decision, we should still be asking and get into the habit of asking. And then I love that, again, as you're saying, the more that we ask, then the more we can trust that answers will come or guidance will come, even if we don't ask. I've had that happen. I was on a walk recently and something just like came through, and it was a question that I had asked about before, didn't get an answer, and then it came later.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't want anyone to feel like you should be asking about, which tomato to buy. So, the last thing that we will discuss today is what Helen and Bill asked about, or what Jesus said they should have asked about. And that's a pretty interesting list in its own right.
It's a great list.
Do you want to share from that?
Yeah. And this again is not exhaustive, but it's a really great list. So they were supposed to ask about, or did ask about, who is on their list. Each of them apparently had a list of people they were supposed to help, when they should have review periods, review the course, whether Bill should get a flu shot, whether there are any corrections to make to the notes, when Helen should stop taking notes because it was time to go to work, how to handle all minutia, including things like where to buy a winter coat, which miracles to perform, when they should transcribe the notes, when Helen should dictate what she'd taken down to Bill to type up, when Helen should visit or not visit a dying friend in the hospital, what she was supposed to pray for that friend, which romantic partner to select, if Bill should give their cab away to someone else, if Bill should offer to let a colleague share their cab, when they should meet and go over the notes, whether they should photocopy the notes, what to do about an apparent need for a bookcase, apparently in their office space, how to handle inviting Bill to a group lunch, if and when Helen should call Bill, or should she wait for him to call, when Helen should meditate again after having a fear reaction to meditation and being told to take a break, how they should get home from work, apparently on a day where there was a traffic issue, who Helen should give miracles to on a particular day, if they should go to the Neurological Institute to go over a case, what they should do about Mike, who had developed feelings for Helen. So she had given him some psychotherapeutic help. What to do about a possible strike involving the elevator operators in Helen's building. And that's not an exhaustive list. And you really see the detail.
Feels exhaustive, but
exhausting.
Yeah, but you get an idea of just the kinds of things that they asked about or were told to ask about and how small they are. You know?
Yeah.
It's not picking out apples and tomatoes from the store, but at the same time, you know, it's when Helen should call Bill. Yeah, that feels pretty insignificant. And yet she asked about that or was told to ask about that. So, yeah.
Well, what I'm finding is that I'm asking about smaller things than I used to. And it's just because it's practical. So if I was writing, for instance, I would very rarely ask. And now I'll ask a number of times while I'm writing something because it just makes the piece better.
Yeah. And
right?
I also feel like it should be said that even though I'm kind of harping on asking too much, that's not the issue. The issue really is that we don't ask enough. And so I think that if we're talking about a proportion of listeners who are thinking, gosh, I asked too much, that's going to be pretty low. The majority of us aren't asking enough. And that's the muscle that we should be seeking to build.
If you're standing in the produce section with your eyes closed while people walk around you and you're testing, you're muscle testing which tomato to buy, okay, then you can say you're asking too much.
You laugh, but I actually went to dinner with a girlfriend and she pulled out a crystal and put it over her plate. And then depending on which way the crystal moved, she was either going to eat it or not eat it. And I was like, wow, that's more serious than I've ever been. I'll eat just about anything. So, Robert, do you want to say anything about what we've covered before we close? I know we're a little past the top of the hour here. So, what's the big picture?
I think the big picture is this is an incredibly important life skill. And we want to generally spare ourselves the effort that it takes. I think we want to claim the spiritual high ground and say, I'm past that. I think we want to complain and say, I never hear. But I think we need to just, like what's been happening with me in the last few years is I've realized, oh my gosh, this is a huge emphasis in the course. I think the CE has really affected me on this level. This is a huge central part of A Course in Miracles. And we need to just like knuckle under and give in to the need to develop this muscle, as you called it. And the reason is we make better decisions, better for ourselves, better for all concerned. We end up happier. Everyone around us ends up happier. It's life-changing. I find that as I ask more, my days are starting to get structured differently and go differently. And so like we should just give in to the need to develop this habit. It will change our lives and perhaps many other lives as well.
We'll go ahead and leave it there. Thank you, Robert. Thank you to everyone who has joined us live. Next time, we'll be talking about how to ask, how to listen for guidance, and how to discern what it is that you hear. And we hope that you'll join us for that. Until then, bye for now, everyone.